My name is Garrett. And at 35, I never thought my own family would stab me in the back. As a successful software engineer, I agreed to fund my cousin Laura's dream wedding, all $75,000 of it. For months, I wrote checks, approved designs, and supported their vision. Then, 1 week before the ceremony, the text arrived. You're not invited. Laura doesn't want you there. Their betrayal changed everything. Before I tell you how I turned this betrayal into the most empowering moment of my life, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston. My parents worked hard, but always struggled financially. Dad was a high school teacher, and Mom worked part-time at a local bakery while raising me and my younger brother. Money was tight, but they managed to put me through community college. From there, I worked multiple jobs to transfer to a 4-year university and earn my computer science degree. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a tech startup. I lived frugally, saved aggressively, and invested wisely. While my colleagues splurged on luxury apartments and expensive cars, I shared a small apartment with 2 roommates and drove a 10-year-old Honda. By 30, my investments had paid off, and I found myself in a financial position my parents could never have imagined. I bought a comfortable condo in a nice neighborhood and finally had breathing room in my budget. Despite my success, my relationship with my extended family had always been strained. We saw each other at obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional family reunions, but there was never any real closeness. My Aunt Patricia, Uncle Rob, and their daughter Laura always seemed to view me with a mixture of envy and dismissal. When I couldn't attend family events because of work commitments, they made snide comments about me, thinking I was too good for them. When I did attend, they asked invasive questions about my salary or made backhanded compliments about my fancy job. Laura was 3 years younger than me, and we were never particularly close growing up. She was the popular cheerleader type in high school, while I was the quiet, studious kid who preferred computers to parties. After high school, she drifted between retail jobs and community college courses without ever settling on a career path. We barely spoke during family gatherings, exchanging pleasantries before gravitating to different corners of the room, so I was surprised when I received an invitation to a family dinner celebrating Laura's engagement to Marcus, her boyfriend of 2 years. Marcus worked in pharmaceutical sales and seemed like a decent guy from the few times I'd met him. They made a photogenic couple, both attractive and socially polished. I decided to attend the dinner, hoping that perhaps as adults, we could move past the awkwardness of our youth and develop a more mature relationship. The engagement dinner was held at an upscale restaurant downtown. As everyone ordered cocktails and appetizers, Laura excitedly shared their vision for the wedding. It would be a lavish affair at the prestigious Hampton estate, with 200 guests, a 5-course meal, designer floral arrangements, and a live band. Her eyes sparkled as she described the hand-calligraphed invitations and custom bridesmaid dresses. Marcus nodded along enthusiastically, adding details about the premium open bar and weekend accommodations for out-of-town guests. As Laura painted this elaborate picture, I noticed the strained smiles on Aunt Patricia and Uncle Rob's faces. They exchanged worried glances when Laura mentioned flying in a famous photographer from New York. It became clear that the wedding Laura was describing would cost well into 6 figures, far beyond what her parents could afford on Uncle Rob's manager salary at a local hardware store and Aunt Patricia's part-time income as a dental receptionist. After dessert, while Laura and Marcus were showing her engagement ring to the restaurant manager, Uncle Rob pulled me aside near the restrooms. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes fixed on the floor as he cleared his throat. "Garrett, I know we haven't always been close," he began, his voice low. "But Laura is our only daughter, and she has her heart set on this wedding. Patricia and I have saved some money, but nowhere near enough for what she wants. We're considering a second mortgage, but even that won't cover everything." I stood awkwardly, already sensing where this conversation was heading. "Laura mentioned you've done well for yourself," he continued, finally meeting my eyes. "We would never ask for a handout, but if you could contribute, even a little, toward your cousin's special day, it would mean the world to us." My first instinct was to decline politely. Their financial difficulties weren't my responsibility, and Laura's wedding plans seemed unnecessarily extravagant. But then I thought about my own financial security and how helping them might finally bridge the gap between us. Perhaps this could be the beginning of a closer family relationship. Let me think about it, I replied cautiously. Maybe we could sit down next week and go through the numbers. Uncle Rob's face lit up with relief. He patted my shoulder with more warmth than he'd shown me in years. Thank you, Garrett. You're a good man. The following weekend, I met with Uncle Rob, Aunt Patricia, Laura, and Marcus at their home. Laura presented a detailed wedding budget that totaled just over $75,000. I nearly choked on my coffee when I saw the figure, but kept my expression neutral as she enthusiastically walked through each category. Uncle Rob and Aunt Patricia could contribute $20,000 from their savings, and Marcus's parents had offered $10,000. So we're looking at a shortfall of about $45,000, Laura concluded. Looking at me expectantly, I took a deep breath. What if I covered the entire $75,000? I suggested. You and your parents could keep your savings for a house, down payment, or emergency fund. The room fell silent. Laura's mouth dropped open, and Aunt Patricia's eyes welled with tears. Are you serious? Marcus asked. That's incredibly generous. Family is important, I said, surprised by my own offer but warming to the idea. I'd be happy to do this for Laura. What followed was a scene I'd never experienced with my family before. Laura rushed over and hugged me tightly. Aunt Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, murmuring blessings. Uncle Rob shook my hand with both of his, repeatedly thanking me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly valued by my extended family. Over the next few months, I became actively involved in the wedding planning. Laura added me to the email chain with the wedding planner, and I attended meetings about venues, catering, and decorations. I wrote checks for deposits on the Hampton estate, the renowned Chef Giovanni's catering service, and the award-winning Harmony String Quartet for the ceremony. Each time I transferred funds, Laura sent enthusiastic thank you texts with multiple heart emojis. I found myself genuinely enjoying the planning process. The wedding planner, Sophia, was professional and considerate, always acknowledging my input and ensuring I was informed about every decision. We selected an elegant black and gold color scheme for the reception, and I suggested adding a champagne tower, which Laura loved. When discussions turned to the dinner menu, my recommendation of including a seafood option was enthusiastically adopted. For the first time, I felt like I was building a real connection with Laura. We exchanged texts about wedding details throughout the week, and she began calling me for advice on vendor contracts. I even helped her negotiate a better rate with the videographer, saving several $1,000s. Uncle Rob invited me for beers to watch basketball games, and Aunt Patricia started sending me containers of homemade lasagna, my favorite childhood meal. As winter turned to spring and the June wedding date approached, I found myself increasingly excited about the event. I bought a new tailored suit and researched appropriate wedding gifts, eventually settling on a generous contribution to their honeymoon fund, along with a set of crystal champagne flutes. For the first time in my life, I felt like a valued member of the family, not just an outsider looking in. I believed that my generosity had finally earned me a place at the table, both literally and figuratively. Little did I know that the table was being pulled out from under me, one leg at a time. The first hint that something was off came during a tasting session at Chef Giovanni's restaurant. Laura had invited me to help select the final menu. But when I arrived, she seemed distracted and barely acknowledged my presence. While the chef presented each course, Laura constantly texted on her phone, only looking up to consult with the wedding planner. When I offered an opinion about the risotto being too salty, Laura cut me off. "Let's stick with it," she said dismissively. "Everyone else loves it." I brushed it off as pre-wedding stress, but the pattern continued. At the engagement party the following weekend, I arrived to find that I wasn't seated at the family table, but instead placed with distant acquaintances at the back of the venue. When I approached the family table to say hello, Laura barely looked up from her conversation with her bridesmaids. Later that evening, as I waited at the bar for a drink, I overheard Laura talking to her maid of honor, Jessica. near the restrooms. Garrett keeps trying to give his opinion on everything, Laura complained, not realizing I was within earshot. Just because he's paying doesn't mean he gets to design my wedding. I wish he'd just write the checks and stay out of it. Jessica nodded sympathetically. At least you only have to tolerate him until after the wedding. Then you can go back to seeing him at Christmas. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I quietly returned to my table, suddenly seeing the evening in a different light. Was I just a checkbook to them? Had the warm family moments of the past few months been an act to secure my financial support? The following week, Uncle Rob canceled our plans to watch the playoff game, claiming he had to work late. Aunt Patricia stopped sending lasagna. When I called to check in about wedding plans, my calls went to voicemail, and responses to my texts became increasingly delayed and brief. Then, the wedding website launched. Laura had hired a designer to create an elaborate site with information about the venue, registry, and a section thanking those who made the wedding possible. I scrolled through the acknowledgments, expecting to see my name prominently featured as the primary financial contributor. My name wasn't there at all. The site thanked Laura's parents, Marcus's parents, the wedding planner, and even Laura's childhood piano teacher who was providing moral support. But there was no mention of the person funding 75% of the entire event. I casually mentioned this to Laura during our next phone call. "Oh, the website's still being updated," she said quickly. "We'll add you to the acknowledgement section soon. Anyway, I need to approve the final floral deposit. Can you send another $5,000 today?" I transferred the money immediately, trying to ignore the growing unease. That weekend, I met my best friend Anthony for our weekly tennis match and mentioned the situation. "Dude, they're using you," Anthony said bluntly as we took a water break. "They're taking your money and treating you like an ATM, not family." "That's not true," I protested, though without much conviction. "Laura's just stressed with all the planning. Things will get better." Anthony gave me a skeptical look. "Just be careful, man. Don't let them take advantage of your generosity." I dismissed his concerns, but they lingered in my mind. When the date cards went out the following week, I waited expectantly for mine to arrive. Days passed, then a week, with nothing in my mailbox. Finally, I texted Laura to ask if the cards had been sent. "They went out last week," she replied. "Yours must have gotten lost in the mail. Don't worry about it. You already know the date." Another week passed, and I learned through a family group chat that everyone else had received their save-the-date cards. I drove to Laura's apartment unannounced, determined to address the situation directly. "I think we need to talk," I said when she opened the door, clearly surprised to see me. "I feel like I'm being pushed to the sidelines of this wedding." Despite funding most of it, Laura's eyes immediately welled with tears, a reaction that I would later recognize as manipulative. "I can't believe you'd say that," she sobbed. "I'm under so much pressure with this wedding, and now you're making me feel guilty. Do you know how stressful it is to plan the perfect day?" I immediately backpedaled, feeling like the villain. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to add to your stress. I just want to feel included." She sniffled and nodded. "I appreciate everything you're doing, Garrett. I promise, I'll make sure you feel more included going forward. It's just been crazy with all the details." I left feeling reassured, convinced that I had overreacted. Laura sent me a formal invitation the next day with a sweet handwritten note, and I felt our relationship was back on track. I continued writing checks for various expenses. Relieved that the awkwardness had been addressed, my relief was short-lived. As spring progressed, the wedding planning intensified, and so did the financial demands. What had started as a $75,000 budget somehow expanded to nearly $90,000. There were unexpected charges for everything from chair upgrades to premium linens to specialized lighting. Each time, Laura would call or text with an urgent request for additional funds, always with an explanation about why this particular upgrade was absolutely necessary. "The regular chairs look so cheap in the photographs," she explained when requesting an additional $2,000 for gold Chiavari chairs. "Everyone will notice, and it'll ruin the aesthetic we've worked so hard on." Against my better judgment, I continued to approve these expenses, still clinging to the hope that my generosity would solidify my place in the family. but the evidence suggesting otherwise continued to mount. I discovered through social media that Laura and Marcus were planning elaborate bachelor and bachelorette parties in Las Vegas. Photos of itineraries and matching custom t-shirts appeared on Instagram, tagged with personalized hashtags. Every family member seemed to be included, from Uncle Rob to distant cousins I barely knew. Everyone except me. When I casually asked Laura about the parties during a family dinner, she looked uncomfortable. "Oh, those are just being organized by the wedding party," she said vaguely. "It's traditional that family members don't attend." Later that evening, I overheard Uncle Rob talking to another relative about his flight to Vegas. When I approached, they abruptly changed the subject. The next day, I confronted Uncle Rob directly about being excluded. "You're being too sensitive, Garrett," he said dismissively. "These parties are for Laura and Marcus's close friends. You and Laura have never been that close, you know that. But I'm paying for their entire wedding," I pointed out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Doesn't that count for anything?" Uncle Rob's expression hardened. "Is that why you offered to pay? So you could buy your way into being Laura's best friend? The money was a gift, Garrett. It shouldn't come with strings attached." I walked away from that conversation feeling both hurt and confused. Was it wrong to expect some level of appreciation and inclusion in return for my generosity? Was I truly trying to buy my way into the family as Uncle Rob suggested? The pattern of exclusion continued. Laura invited me to see her wedding dress, which I had paid for, then canceled last minute, claiming the boutique had limited their appointment to just her mother and maid of honor. The bachelor and bachelorette parties came and went, with social media flooded with photos of family members enjoying Las Vegas, none acknowledging my absence or the fact that my financial contribution had made the celebrations possible. In May, 6 weeks before the wedding, formal invitations were sent out. Days passed, then a week, and my mailbox remained empty. I tried to ignore it, telling myself there must be a logical explanation, but anxiety gnawed at me. Finally, I called Laura directly. "Did the invitations go out?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, last week," she replied. "You didn't get yours? That's so strange. The mail service must be terrible in your area. This is the second time my mail from you has gotten lost," I pointed out. "Maybe I should just pick up my invitation in person to be safe." There was a long pause before Laura responded. Sure. I guess you could stop by tomorrow evening." The next day, I drove to Laura's apartment. She answered the door with a tight smile and invited me in reluctantly. The coffee table was covered with wedding planning materials, including a stack of the elegant cream and gold invitations I had paid for. "I just need to find your invitation," Laura said, shuffling through papers nervously. "I know we set one aside for you." After several minutes of awkward searching, she produced an envelope from a drawer. "Here it is." I opened it on the spot, noticing immediately that my name was misspelled as Garrett with 2 instead of 2. Given that I had written dozens of checks to vendors over the past few months, all clearly showing the correct spelling of my name, this seemed like an unlikely oversight. As I was leaving, I heard Laura on the phone in her bedroom, the door not quite closed. "He just showed up demanding an invitation," she was saying in a low voice. "I know. It's so awkward. But we need the final payments." "No, Mom, I can't just tell him now. We still need the money for the honeymoon suite and the videographer." I quietly let myself out, her words echoing in my head. On the drive home, I finally admitted to myself what should have been obvious months ago. I was being used. The following weeks brought more evidence. I discovered I wasn't on the list for the rehearsal dinner when the restaurant called me directly to confirm meal choices, thinking I was the point of contact since I had paid the deposit. When I mentioned this to Laura, she and Marcus reluctantly added me to the list, but made it clear it was an exception to traditional rehearsal dinner etiquette. "Usually it's just the wedding party and immediate family," Marcus explained condescendingly. "But since you've been so generous, we can make an exception." I swallowed my pride and thanked them, even as anger and hurt built inside me. I had now spent over $80,000 on their wedding, and they were treating my inclusion as a favor to me. Anthony urged me to confront them directly. "They're walking all over you, man. Either demand respect or pull the funding. But I had come too far to back out now. The wedding was just weeks away, and most of the money was already spent on non-refundable deposits. Besides, a part of me still hoped that once the stress of wedding planning was over, my relationship with Laura and the rest of the family might improve. Perhaps they were just so focused on creating the perfect day that they were temporarily blinded to how their actions were affecting me. So, I continued writing checks, paying for the videographer's extended package, upgrading the dessert buffet, and covering the custom monogrammed napkins Laura suddenly decided were essential. Each payment felt like another link in the chain of obligation I had forged for myself. The sleepless nights began around this time. I would lie awake, replaying conversations, analyzing text messages, questioning my own perceptions. Was I being oversensitive? Was it normal to feel this excluded after contributing so much? Or was I truly being manipulated by the people who were supposed to care about me? Deep down, I knew the answer. But it would take one final betrayal to force me to act on it. The wedding was exactly 1 week away when I received the final invoice from the venue. The remaining balance for the Hampton Estate rental, including the ceremony space, reception hall, and bridal suite, came to $28,000. It was the largest single payment of the entire wedding, due in full 3 days before the event. I had just transferred the funds when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message in the family group chat, which had been mostly quiet in recent days as everyone was busy with final wedding preparations. Uncle Rob. Garrett. We need to talk about the wedding day. Before I could respond, another message appeared. Aunt Patricia. This is difficult, but we feel it needs to be said. My heart began to race as I waited for the next message. When it came, the words hit me like a physical blow. Laura, you're not invited. I don't want you there. I stared at the screen in disbelief as more messages poured in. Marcus. We've decided it would be best if you didn't attend. Uncle Rob. Laura feels your presence would create tension on her special day. Aunt Patricia. We hope you understand and respect her wishes. Laura. You've always made me uncomfortable, and this day is about me and Marcus, not about you trying to buy your way into the family. My fingers trembled as I typed a response. Me, is this a joke? I just paid the final venue balance. Laura. The money was a gift. Gifts don't come with conditions, Uncle Rob. We appreciate your financial contribution, but that doesn't entitle you to an invitation, Marcus. Just send the final checks for the outstanding vendors and respect Laura's wishes. I sat in stunned silence, reading and rereading the messages as they continued to come in. Each one twisted the knife deeper. After months of planning, after more than $80,000 spent, after all the times I had swallowed my pride and ignored the signs of manipulation, they were cutting me out completely and without remorse. The screen blurred as tears filled my eyes, not tears of sadness, but of rage and humiliation. I had been played for a fool from the beginning. The warmth, the inclusion, the family bonding. It had all been an elaborate performance designed to extract maximum financial benefit from me. I threw my phone across the room, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Then I slumped onto my couch, my mind racing with painful realizations. Every time Laura had called me excited about a wedding detail, every time Uncle Rob had invited me for beers, every time Aunt Patricia had sent me homemade food, it had all been calculated. They had identified me as a source of funds and methodically cultivated my desire for family connection to exploit my generosity. I sat there for hours, replaying months of interactions in my head with new clarity. As night fell, my doorbell rang. It was Anthony, holding a 6-pack of beer. You weren't answering texts, he said, taking in my disheveled appearance. What happened? I wordlessly handed him my phone, open to the family chat. He read through the messages, his expression darkening with each swipe. Those ungrateful pieces of... He trailed off, shaking his head in disgust. I knew they were using you, but this is another level. Anthony stayed with me that night, listening as I poured out months of built-up frustration and hurt. Around midnight, fueled by anger and several beers, I began searching through my email for all correspondence related to the wedding. Reading through the messages with new perspective, I saw countless red flags I had willfully ignored. Then, I found something that made my blood run cold. In an email chain about the rehearsal dinner, Laura had accidentally included me in a reply meant just for her parents and Marcus. In it, she wrote, "Garrett's being difficult about the rehearsal dinner now. Can you believe it? After all the work we've done managing him, he still wants more. Don't worry, just 2 more weeks of pretending he matters. Then we never have to deal with him again unless we need another loan." The timestamp on the email was from 3 weeks ago. They had been planning to cut me out all along, just waiting until they had secured every last dollar they could squeeze from me. "I can't believe I was so blind," I said, showing Anthony the email. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I stared at the email for a long moment, something shifting inside me. The hurt was still there, but now it was being overtaken by something else. Clarity. For months, I had allowed myself to be manipulated and disrespected because I was desperate for family connection. I had compromised my dignity, ignored my instincts, and betrayed myself in the process. "I'm done being their ATM," I said finally, a new resolve hardening within me. "They want to cut me out? Fine. But they're about to learn that actions have consequences." As dawn broke, a plan began to form in my mind. If they thought they could take my money and discard me without repercussions, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The next morning, I called in sick to work and set up my dining room table as a command center. On one side, I laid out my laptop, a notepad, and all the wedding contracts I had saved. On the other side, I placed my phone in airplane mode to avoid distractions. It was time to take methodical action. First, I created a detailed spreadsheet listing every vendor, the amount I had paid them, contract terms, cancellation policies, and contact information. The total came to $84,722. Seeing the number in black and white sent a fresh wave of anger through me, fueling my determination. Next, I began making calls, starting with the Hampton estate. When the venue manager, Mrs. Reynolds, answered, I introduced myself calmly. "I'm calling about the Johnson-Peterson wedding scheduled for next Saturday," I said, referring to Laura and Marcus by their last names. "Yes, Mr. Thompson, we just received your final payment. Everything is on track for the big day," Mrs. Reynolds replied cheerfully. "Actually, there's been a change of plans," I said. "I need to discuss the contract and my options at this point." "Is there a problem with the venue?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I took a deep breath. "The problem is that I've paid for the entire wedding. But I've just been informed by the couple that I'm not welcome to attend." There was a pause on the line. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" I explained the situation truthfully, without emotional embellishment. How I had agreed to fund the wedding to help family. How I had been systematically excluded despite my contributions. And finally, how I had been explicitly uninvited after paying the final venue balance. "I have the text messages if you need to see them," I added. Mrs. Reynolds' professional tone softened with sympathy. "Mr. Thompson, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never heard anything quite like this. Let me check your contract." After a few minutes of keyboard clicking, she returned to the line. "The contract is in your name, not the couple's. You signed all the paperwork and made all the payments. Legally speaking, this is your event." A small, vindicated smile crossed my face. "What are my options at this point?" "Well, you could transfer the contract to the couple, allowing them to take financial responsibility for the remaining charges and any changes. Or, since it's your contract, you could cancel the event entirely. Our cancellation policy normally requires 30 days notice for a refund, but given these unusual circumstances, I might be able to make an exception and refund a portion of your payment." I considered my options carefully. "I don't want a refund," I said finally. "But I do want to cancel the event." "Are you sure?" Mrs. Reynolds asked. "This is a significant amount of money." "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "Consider it the price of a valuable lesson." After completing the cancellation, I moved systematically through my vendor list. The conversations followed a similar pattern. Initial confusion, followed by sympathy when I explained the situation, and finally, options for cancellation or transfer of responsibility. Chef Giovanni was particularly understanding. Family can be more painful than any other wound, he said philosophically. Instead of canceling entirely, would you like to redirect your deposit to fund a dinner for a charity? I work with several local organizations that could use such generosity. I accepted his offer gratefully, arranging for the catering deposit to fund a meal at a nearby homeless shelter. The photographer and videographer were easier to deal with. Since their services hadn't yet been rendered, they agreed to cancel without penalties, though both expressed outrage on my behalf at the situation. With each cancellation, I felt a growing sense of empowerment, replacing the hurt and humiliation of the previous day. For months, I had allowed myself to be treated as nothing more than a wallet with legs. Now I was reclaiming my dignity and self-respect. As I worked through my list, I also gathered all digital files related to the wedding. I saved copies of every email, contract, text message, and planning document to a secure cloud drive, then systematically removed my access to the shared planning folders, but not before downloading everything and creating a comprehensive record of the entire process. By late afternoon, I had contacted every vendor and canceled or redirected all services. The Hampton estate was canceled. The catering was redirected to charity. The flowers would never be delivered. The photographer and videographer had cleared their schedules. The hand-calligraphed place cards would never be set on tables. The monogrammed napkins would never be unfolded. The string quartet would not play a single note. Laura and Marcus's dream wedding had been systematically dismantled. One phone call at a time. As evening approached, I finally took my phone off airplane mode. It immediately exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages from Laura, Marcus, Uncle Rob, Aunt Patricia, and various other family members. I ignored them all and composed a single message to the family group chat. Then pay for it yourselves, leeches. I followed this with a detailed list of all canceled services, the exact amounts I had paid, and confirmation numbers for each cancellation. I ended with, I have saved all communication, proving this was a gift with no strings attached, as you so clearly stated. I've simply chosen to redirect my gift to more deserving recipients. Good luck with your wedding. Then I set my phone to Do Not Disturb, opened a bottle of expensive whiskey I had been saving for the wedding, and called Anthony to update him on my day's work. You actually did it, he said, sounding impressed and slightly awed. They're going to lose their minds. Probably, I agreed, feeling strangely calm. But for the first time in months, I feel like myself again. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer to ensure I was legally protected. He confirmed that since all contracts were in my name and I had documentation showing the money was characterized as a gift by both parties, I was within my rights to cancel services I had paid for. They could try to sue you, he advised, but they'd have a very weak case given the documented evidence of their behavior. Still, retain all those messages and emails, just in case. As predicted, my family's response was immediate and furious. My phone continued to be flooded with messages ranging from enraged to pleading. Laura called me a monster who had ruined her life. Marcus threatened legal action. Uncle Rob left voicemails alternating between fury and desperate negotiation. At one point, Uncle Rob showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I watched through the peephole as he pounded on my door, red-faced and shouting, I know you're in there, Garrett. You can't do this to Laura. After everything we've done for you. I remained silent, recording his tirade on my phone as additional evidence should I need it. After 15 minutes of unanswered knocking and shouting, he finally left. Later that day, Aunt Patricia called, her voice tearful and manipulative. Laura is devastated, Garrett. She's been crying for hours. How could you do this to your own family, the same way you did it to me? I replied calmly. By deciding I wasn't family after all. But this is different, she protested. This is her wedding day. No, I corrected her. This was an event I was paying for, which you all explicitly uninvited me from. I've simply chosen not to fund a party I'm not welcome to attend. Over the next few days, The tone of the messages gradually shifted from outrage to desperation as the reality of the situation sank in. Laura and Marcus had no venue, no catering, no photographer, no flowers, and no time to rebook everything. Their perfect wedding was collapsing around them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Various family members made attempts at reconciliation, clearly hoping I might be persuaded to restore some of the canceled services. Cousin Jessica, who had previously been cool toward me, suddenly reached out with effusive warmth. Uncle Rob offered a formal apology, though his words rang hollow given his previous behavior. Even Marcus's parents contacted me, though they had barely spoken 2 words to me during the entire planning process. I responded to all these overtures with the same calm, factual statement. I've redirected my gift to more deserving recipients. I wish you all the best with your revised wedding plans. As the original wedding date approached, I made one final decision. I booked a solo trip to Hawaii for the weekend, ensuring I would be as far away as possible from the fallout. As my plane took off that Friday morning, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Laura's wedding or my family's manipulation. I was thinking about what I wanted, what would bring me joy, what would help me heal. While I was enjoying the pristine beaches and clear blue waters of Maui, Laura and Marcus were scrambling to salvage some semblance of a wedding. Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I gradually pieced together what had happened in my absence. Unable to secure another venue on such short notice, they had relocated the ceremony to Uncle Rob's backyard. Instead of Chef Giovanni's 5-course gourmet meal, guests were served a hastily arranged buffet from a local deli. The designer flowers were replaced by arrangements from the grocery store. The guest list had been cut from 200 to about 50, limited to only the closest family members and friends who could be contacted in time. Photos posted on social media showed a far cry from the elegant black and gold affair Laura had planned. Plastic chairs instead of gold Chiavaris, paper tablecloths instead of premium linens, a portable speaker instead of the string quartet. Laura's expression in every photo was tight and forced, her smile never reaching her eyes. My friend Thomas, who had attended as the +1 of a distant cousin, called me in Hawaii with a first-hand report. It was the most awkward wedding I've ever been to, he said. Everyone was whispering about what happened. Laura burst into tears during the reception and had to be led away by her mother. Marcus got drunk and started complaining loudly about family betrayal. The whole thing was a disaster. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. There was undeniable satisfaction in knowing that actions had consequences, but also a twinge of sadness for what could have been if they had treated me with basic decency and respect. When I returned from Hawaii, my phone contained dozens of new messages from family members. They fell into 3 distinct categories. The first group was openly hostile, blaming me entirely for ruining Laura's special day. These messages were filled with accusations and name-calling, portraying me as petty and vindictive. The second group attempted reconciliation, suggesting that we should put this unfortunate incident behind us and move forward as a family. These messages carefully avoided acknowledging any wrongdoing on their part, instead treating the situation as a simple misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. The third group, the smallest but most interesting, came from a few extended family members who reached out privately to express support for my actions. Cousin Jessica, who I had always been cordial but not close with, sent a particularly thoughtful message. "I've watched how they've treated you for years," she wrote. "Always taking, never giving back. What they did with this wedding was wrong, and honestly, it's been happening for longer than you probably realize. I respect that you finally stood up for yourself." I responded to these messages according to their tone. To the hostile ones, I said nothing. To the reconciliation attempts, I replied briefly that I needed time and space to consider the future of these relationships. To the supportive ones, I expressed genuine gratitude and opened the door to building more authentic connections. Laura and Marcus themselves vacillated between anger and attempted manipulation. One day I would receive a scathing message blaming me for everything. The next, a tearful apology that seemed more focused on restoring access to my financial support than on genuinely acknowledging the hurt they had caused. 2 weeks after the wedding, I received a formal apology letter signed by Laura, Marcus, Uncle Rob, and Aunt Patricia. The carefully worded message expressed regret for any misunderstandings and suggested that in the emotional stress of wedding planning, communications may have been unclear. Reading between the lines, it was obvious that Aunt Patricia had written it, and equally obvious that it was not a genuine acceptance of responsibility. I filed the letter away without response. The time for hollow words had passed. I was now focused on actions and boundaries. This experience forced me to reevaluate all my relationships, not just with my extended family. I realized that the wedding incident, while extreme, was not isolated. There were other people in my life who took more than they gave, who appeared when they needed something but disappeared when I needed support. I began the difficult process of setting boundaries. I stopped responding to Uncle Rob's increasingly desperate attempts to clear the air over beers. I declined Aunt Patricia's invitations to family dinners. I removed myself from the family group chat without explanation. Meanwhile, I invested time and energy in building genuine connections. I joined a hiking club, volunteered at a local coding boot camp for underprivileged youth, and reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the months of wedding planning. To my surprise, several extended family members reached out individually to develop relationships separate from the core family drama. Cousin Jessica and I began meeting monthly for coffee, building a friendship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My grandmother, who had remained neutral during the wedding fiasco, invited me for private lunches where we talked about family history and her experiences. Conversations I treasured. The emptiness I initially felt after cutting ties with Laura, Marcus, Uncle Rob, and Aunt Patricia gradually filled with more authentic connections. There was a bittersweet quality to this transition, the liberation of releasing toxic relationships mixed with mourning for the family bonds I had always hoped for, but never truly had. 3 months after the wedding, I started a mentoring program for young tech professionals from disadvantaged backgrounds, channeling my energy into helping others develop financial literacy and career skills. Working with these motivated, grateful young people provided a sense of purpose and connection that my family relationships had never given me. Through it all, I kept the lessons of the wedding fiasco close to my heart. I had learned the hard way that generosity should not come at the expense of self-respect, that helping others financially is not the same as buying their love, and that true family is defined by consistent respect and care, not by DNA. The healing wasn't linear. There were days when anger resurfaced, when I reread old text messages and felt the sting of betrayal fresh again. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I could have handled things differently, but gradually, these moments became less frequent, replaced by a growing sense of peace with my decisions and hope for the future. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I received an unexpected email from Laura. Unlike her previous communications, this one was short, simple, and appeared genuinely reflective. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened. At first, I blamed you entirely, but time has given me perspective. What we did was wrong. I'm truly sorry, not just for uninviting you, but for treating your generosity as an entitlement. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize my part in this. Take care, Laura. I read the message several times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Was this the beginning of genuine accountability, or another manipulation tactic? Only time would tell. For now, I simply saved the email without response, adding it to the record of a painful but ultimately transformative chapter in my life. 6 months turned into a year, and slowly, I rebuilt my life on my own terms. The wedding debacle, painful as it was, had become the catalyst for profound personal growth. It forced me to confront difficult truths about my family dynamics, my own need for validation, and the unhealthy patterns I had allowed to persist for years. I continued my self-imposed distance from Uncle Rob, Aunt Patricia, Laura, and Marcus. This wasn't done out of spite or ongoing anger, but as a necessary boundary to protect my well-being. Some wounds need time and space to heal properly, and this estrangement gave me the opportunity to develop a stronger sense of self-worth, independent of family approval. Not all family relationships remained severed, however. My connection with cousin Jessica deepened into a genuine friendship. Our monthly coffee meetings expanded to include dinners, movies, and even a weekend road trip to the coast. She became the family connection I had always wanted, based on mutual respect and enjoyment of each other's company rather than obligation or financial exchange. My grandmother, now in her 80s, became another unexpected source of authentic family connection. During our lunch dates, she shared family stories I had never heard, helping me understand the generational patterns that had shaped our family dynamics. She never directly criticized Laura or her parents, but her subtle observations about the importance of gratitude and recognizing the difference between generosity and exploitation told me she understood more than she let on. Other extended family members gradually reached out as well. Cousins I had barely known growing up connected with me on social media, then in person. An aunt from my father's side invited me to her son's graduation party, creating an opportunity to develop relationships with that branch of the family. Slowly, I built a network of family connections based on genuine affection and respect, rather than the dysfunctional dynamics I had grown up with. Therapy became an essential part of my healing journey. My therapist, Dr. Rivera, helped me understand that my willingness to fund Laura's wedding wasn't just about generosity. It was a desperate attempt to buy the family connection I had always craved. She guided me through the process of recognizing my own worth, setting healthy boundaries, and developing authentic relationships that weren't transactional. The price of admission to anyone's life should never be financial, she told me during one particularly insightful session. True connection is built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and consistent emotional support. These insights led me to establish the Financial Boundaries Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping young adults navigate family financial pressures. Through workshops, one-on-one counseling, and online resources, we provided tools for setting healthy boundaries around money within families. The foundation became my passion project, transforming my painful experience into a resource that helped others avoid similar situations. Around the 18-month mark after the wedding incident, I received an unexpected phone call from Uncle Rob. His voice sounded older, more subdued than I remembered. "Garrett," he said hesitantly, "I know it's been a while, and I know we have a lot of history between us, but I've been doing some serious thinking, and I owe you a real apology. Not the kind we tried to give before, but a genuine acknowledgement of how badly we treated you." I remained silent, giving him space to continue. "What we did was inexcusable," he went on. "Using your generosity, taking advantage of your desire to be close to the family, then cutting you out when we had what we wanted. I was so focused on giving Laura her dream wedding that I lost sight of basic human decency. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for things to go back to how they were. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the harm we caused, and I'm truly sorry." His words seemed sincere, lacking the manipulative undertone of previous apologies. I thanked him for calling and told him I appreciated his honesty. We didn't make plans to meet or promises to reconnect, but the conversation left a door slightly ajar that had previously been firmly shut. Similar calls came from Aunt Patricia and, eventually, from Laura herself. Each conversation was brief, focused on acknowledgement rather than excuses. I listened more than I spoke, neither rejecting their apologies nor rushing to restore relationships that had proven so damaging. As these tentative reconciliations unfolded, I also experienced growth in my non-family relationships. Anthony remained my steadfast best friend, the person who had seen me at my lowest and supported me without judgment. Through my volunteer work and foundation, I developed new friendships with people who shared my values and interests. Most significantly, I met Rachel, a graphic designer, who volunteered her services to create materials for the Financial Boundaries Foundation. Our professional collaboration gradually evolved into friendship, then into something deeper. Unlike previous relationships where I had used financial generosity as a substitute for emotional connection, with Rachel, I built a foundation of honest communication, mutual support, and genuine understanding. When Rachel and I had been dating for about a year, she asked if I would consider reconnecting with Laura and her parents for a holiday dinner. "I'm not saying you should forget what happened," she clarified. "But from everything you've told me, it seems like they're genuinely remorseful. Maybe there's a way forward, not to the relationship you had before, but to something new and healthier." After careful consideration, I agreed to a small neutral gathering at a restaurant. The dinner was initially awkward, with everyone carefully avoiding certain topics. But as the evening progressed, there were moments of authentic connection, even laughter. We didn't discuss the wedding or the money, focusing instead on current events, shared memories from before the conflict, and getting to know Rachel. As we left the restaurant, Laura pulled me aside. "I want you to know that I think about what happened every day," she said quietly. "It taught me the hardest lesson of my life about entitlement, gratitude, and the consequences of treating people as means to an end. I'm still working on becoming a better person because of it." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. Sometimes the most painful lessons are the ones that change us for the better. That dinner was the beginning of a slow, cautious rebuilding of family relationships. Not a return to the past, but the creation of something new, with clearer boundaries and expectations. I maintained a certain emotional distance, protective of the hard-won self-respect I had developed. Financial topics remained strictly off-limits, a boundary everyone seemed to understand and respect. Looking back on the 2-year journey since that devastating text message, I recognized how much I had grown. The experience had taught me that true generosity comes from love, not from obligation or the hope of buying affection. I learned to identify the crucial difference between giving as an expression of care and being taken from by those who see you as a resource rather than a person. Most importantly, I discovered that my self-worth was never tied to financial support or family validation. The freedom that came with setting clear boundaries transformed not just my family relationships, but every aspect of my life. I became more authentic in my friendships, more confident in my career, and more open in my relationship with Rachel. The wedding that never happened had ultimately given me something far more valuable than family inclusion. It gave me the clarity to distinguish between people who valued me for who I was and those who valued me for what I could provide. It taught me that sometimes standing up for yourself means walking away, and that the temporary pain of confrontation is far less damaging than the slow erosion of self-respect that comes from accepting mistreatment. As I move forward in my life, I carry these lessons with me every day. I've learned that true family isn't necessarily defined by blood, but by consistent respect, mutual support, and genuine love. Sometimes we find those connections within our biological family. Sometimes we create them with the family we choose for ourselves. What's your experience with family and financial boundaries? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against people who were taking advantage of your generosity? Drop a comment below to share your story, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an essential act of self-respect, and you deserve nothing less. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to protect your own worth, no matter how difficult the circumstances.